Thank you so much, Richard, for helping with my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a space science fan. I'm a member of the DC Science Writers Association, also known as DUXWA, and a member of the American Geophysical Union. With that organization, I pay a little more attention when they have space science news, but they cover Earth and space science. Big fan of science fiction, and also I'm rooting for the Artemis mission.
Well, awesome. I'm so happy to get to talk to you. Starting out with being a space science fan, I guess you must track very closely the research that's done on the ISS.
Well, I guess that's a little more in the weeds, I have to admit. I pay attention a little more broadly than that. For example, I found out about your project by reading Politico Space.
Yeah, awesome. I was so glad they were willing to kind of give my project a little bit of attention. It was allowed for me to reach some people that would not have been possible otherwise. So that was good. But I guess talking about broadly,
Yeah.
what are, whenever you talk to space advocates about what do we get out of our investment in space, people start talking about, well, there's all these spin-offs and there's all these things that we learn, and like crystal growth in space, and the X-ray crystallography has always been kind of something that's been talked about. But at the same token, and maybe this is in the weeds question, it's really hard to kind of articulate specific things that have come out of that investment. And I was wondering if there was anything that maybe sticks out in your mind that are good talking points and good kind of success stories.
Yeah, two of them that jump immediately to mind, which actually might be very popular talking points, are Tang, which I used to read, which I used to drink when I was a kid, and Velcro. I use Velcro all the time.
Yeah.
So I guess Artemis is a good example of things that are to come. Of course, there's all kinds of research going on in the ISS, which you already mentioned. I mean, one of them that I thought was really interesting is when they needed some tool to do something on the ISS a few years ago, and they didn't have it, so they 3D printed it. As I understand the story, NASA uploaded the what are they? The CAD drawings, the 3D CAD drawings, and they ran the tool off, and then they were able to do what they needed to do. The space program is really good for international cooperation. Or another really good example of that is our relationship with Russia. I mean, at the same time, we're very concerned about them interfering in the 2020 US election. We're still catching rides from them to get to the ISS. So I think international cooperation is really important. The things that come from the Artemis mission, I mean, everything from having it be a platform to get to Mars, but also to get back to the moon with humans is really important. They're going to mine on the moon. They might be able to use the moon to do more space research, with telescopes. There'll be more of a reach from there than it would be from the Earth or orbiting the Earth. Lots of possibilities for the private sector with space tourism and things like that in the future. Well, I mean, that's a little more far-fetched. I mean, it's still really, really expensive to send somebody into space, and the price would have to come down. I don't know how many decades it would take for an average person to be able to go to the moon, because what's the price tag right now? Still millions of dollars for a private citizen to even just go into orbit?
Yeah, SpaceX, I think, is charging $55 million per person.
Okay, there you go. Yeah,
Not exactly front pocket money, is it?
that's right.
But I don't know. Looking at what SpaceX is also doing with the Starship and 100% reusability and kind of like the economies of scale and the fact that they want to make it so the same Starship could fly like 3 times per day, have a factory in Boca Chica that produces 2 per week. Whenever you start looking at this, you're like, man, that's a whole different world. That's like going from computers that take up entire buildings to, kind of like a laptop.
Oh yeah. Uh, well, I hope they get to 100% reusability because if I understand correctly, it's only the first stage of the rockets from SpaceX that come back and land, and the second stage still burns up in the atmosphere. Do I have that right?
Well, with the Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, you're right. They only recover the first stage. They are also recovering the payload fairings, which surprisingly enough are several $1 million with all the acoustic dampening that they have. And they are, expending the second stage. But the Starship that's being built in Boca Chica, that they're currently like developing and hopefully will be flying in a couple of years, um, it will be 100% reusable. The first stage and the second stage will both um, uh, land, be refueled, inspected, and take off again.
Oh, that's really good news. This makes you think of this Elon Musk quote. He gave this speech that I saw on YouTube where he was just outlining the whole Starship program of using the reusable rockets to send, what is it, 100 people at a time to to Mars. Autonomous missions would go ahead and start dropping off supplies for the first wave of people to use when they get there. And he said something along the lines of, "It's 2020. Why don't we have a base on the moon already? What the hell's going on?" You know? And it's so true. I'm just a little bit concerned about what's going on with Congress because they seem to be, and there's a partisan divide here. I think Republicans are more willing to fund the Artemis program than the Democrats are. But even the Republicans might not be willing to give NASA everything that they want. And my attitude about that is that I think their attitude would change a lot if suddenly the Chinese were going to send people to the moon. It would become more of a national security issue, let's say. I mean, even more than I think I saw this headline in Politico Space. Well, I read the article linked from Political Space too about Brightenside's telling Congress that China's going to put up another space station in the next few years, and we have to keep up with them and beat them. So that, of course, this sort of thing is going on all the time. I think I got a little bit away from your original question.
Yeah, but it's an interesting point, right? Because the first time I went to the moon, it was all about big power competition. And, you were kind of touching on the thought that we need to be number one. I think one challenge for me in terms of being number one, if that's the ultimate goal, there are far less costly and potentially risky ways to get there. Because to be number one, you just got to make sure that nobody else, gets in front of what you're doing. And that's where sort of like the sabotage and, kind of anti-competitive type of forces come into play. I mean, if we want to keep China from going to the moon, maybe we don't beat them in the outright competition. Maybe, you have like CIA agents and what have you kind of sabotaging their program to keep them from getting there ahead of us. Whereas
that actually didn't, I'm sorry to interrupt, that actually didn't even enter my mind. I was just thinking of it in terms of, we should help NASA do everything that they can to maintain this admittedly aggressive schedule that they've got for Artemis. You were saying?
Yes. I was thinking that what should really motivate us is this idea that humanity is branching out into the universe. Like
Hmm.
we really need to like the goal is not to be number one, but the goal is to make it happen in a way that's kind of consistent with our values and our way of doing things. Uh, if we could kind of like move the focus to the actually make it happen part, as opposed to just great power competition, then I think that may make options like the sabotage and the kind of containment options less acceptable and less likely to happen as well.
I agree with you. I mean, when I was talking about this number one business, that was just from a nationalistic, you know, USA first, and NASA being an American agency point of view. I mean, the ISS, we always talk about that as being an American mission. I suppose that America took the lead on it, but it is, of course, an international mission. I mean, whenever there's a piece of space debris that's heading toward the ISS, what do all the astronauts do? They go into the Soyuz module, to shelter. Um,
Exactly.
yeah. So yes, I'm more concerned with humans getting back to the moon and going to Mars for exploration than just the United States being the first to do it.
Yeah, me too. I just you look at society as a whole and the American population, and it's like, how do you inspire them about what we could do? That big opportunity that is there, and kind of make it as something that's a really positive thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you awaken people to that? I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think it's actually pretty interesting how the space program has made its way into popular culture. I mean, you see people just casually wearing NASA shirts on the street. You can buy them at Target, and you have TV shows like Space Force on Netflix. There's there was the other one, Mars. That was a few years before. There's a there's a new series that's happening right now that uh, Hilary Swank stars in.
Away.
Thank you. So it's all over the place, and I think that's really great. Um, I agree with the notion that if you really want to capture the imagination of regular people, that you have to have people involved in exploration. I was really excited about, as much as the next person that takes a casual interest in this sort of thing, in the New Horizons mission. Um, the ESA mission that landed a probe on a comet. And actually, I have a little side story about that. But having people do it, like for example, this whole arc of, well, that's getting back into America again, but the commercial sector sending people to the ISS instead of it just being a military mission. We're able to do that now. First with SpaceX. Yeah, I think people are going to be really excited the more and more government is able to talk about. We're going to send people to the moon instead of just talking about it, saying we're funded, we're going to actually do it. There's a few different things that'll happen eventually. I hope that'll make people really excited too. That don't have to do with exploration so much. Was it NASA that released an image of a black hole? Was it last year? It's just this kind of a orange ring because it was a composite and all that, but still it was the first time that ever happened, and that was really exciting.
I don't remember who released it, but I do remember what you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah, I went to this talk from a couple of, I'll turn that off as soon as I find where my phone is. I can hear it ringing, but I don't see it. Hold on just a second.
Sure thing.
Couldn't recognize the number, so I rejected the phone call. Okay. I saw a talk from a couple of exoplanet hunters, which was really interesting. And they said when scientists are able to take an image of an exoplanet, that it's going to be on the cover of every magazine on the entire planet, in the same week. Because this is going to be so exciting. Because right now, all you can see is, oh, you see this? Here's a star, and you see those two little smudges. Those are planets. That kind of thing. So when we have big milestones like that, I think that gets regular people more excited, because it'll be headline news, at least for a little bit, and not just in scientific trade publications. Yeah. So I think the bottom line is astronauts, cosmonauts, taikonauts, and all the rest of them going out there doing the exploring. That gets people interested, I think.
Yeah. So I have a point on that I'll get to a little later on, but I guess before going there, when did you find out that we were planning to go to the moon in 2024?
Oh, it must have been just the first time I heard about it must have been in the news, the Washington Post or something like that.
Like in print or on the website?
I don't remember.
Okay.
They've been talking about it for a little while now, and then they're really doing a good job, I think, with PR. I went to the Anthem in DC, and there was was it the National Symphony Orchestra? I can't remember which orchestra it is, but they played Holst's The Planets. And Jim Bridenside, if I'm pronouncing his last name right, he came out and gave a speech beforehand about going back to the moon and the whole thing, before the orchestra played. And NASA was there. They had a bunch of different booths set up. So, when people were coming in and going to their seats, they could fiddle around with everything NASA was talking about. So I thought that was pretty good.
Now, the kind of like the genesis of this project was, you remember Doug Laverio used to have that lapel pin where he was counting down the end of days to the 2024?
No, I don't know that one.
He was the associate administrator that was appointed in November of 2019, tasked with heading the Human Exploration Organization at NASA, or operations, Human Exploration and Operations Division Directorate at NASA. And, to kind of reemphasize the urgency, he had a lapel pin that had the number of days to the end of 2024 that he would change every single day.
Oh, that's funny. He had to do it manually.
Yeah, exactly. But and he would call out a NASA employee as being the HEO, which is like, the division hero of the day. And so I thought, wouldn't it be cool to ask everyday people what they think about us going back to space? So December of last year is when I started this project, and my plan was to go up to random people at coffee shops and at the mall and at the, on the streets, at the airports, wherever I happen to be, every single day, just ask somebody, have a conversation. Some of them lasted for, a minute, and some of them lasted for an hour or so. But so I've interviewed people at coffee shops, on the street, at the stores in Houston, Minneapolis, York, London, and Edinburgh. So those are all the places I just happen to be traveling between December and middle of March. And what is your thoughts on how many of them knew we were going to the moon in 2024?
Oh, I don't know. Was it half?
Would you believe it was closer to like 10%?
Oh, that's bad.
Yeah. In fact, really... one of the people I interviewed said, why is NASA keeping it a secret?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I guess you could call that a valid criticism.
Well, and I think it also speaks to how we get news now too. You and I probably get fed all the space stuff, but there's probably whole areas of human experiences that we have no idea about. And conversely, a lot of these people are not being fed any space stuff. And so they're like,
Yeah.
space doesn't happen.
Well, maybe when they get closer to doing this and they can start talking about, we're going to do it, here's the people that are going to go, this is when we're going to, the percentage will go up because there'll be more general reporting about it, you know, in magazines and newspapers, on TV and all the rest of it. I would hope. You know, that's bigger news.
Yeah, I would hope so too. But it's kind of interesting, you know, now that a lot of people are stuck at home, you know, it's
Yeah.
kind of self-isolating. You know, almost all of my information comes from the computer. Whereas before, when I used to drive around, I listened to the radio, see billboards, hear other people talking. It's amazing, even since March, how much narrower our kind of awareness of the world around us might have become.
That's interesting. You know, what I do is, yeah, I look at different websites on my laptop as well, but when I go downstairs and have breakfast or make myself something for lunch and all that, I'll take my phone with me and I'll throw NPR on.
Oh, cool.
That's a pretty good trick, you know.
Yeah, especially if you're getting like the live feed versus kind of like the curated set of articles that it thinks you'll be most interested in.
That's what I do. You know, I've got my local NPR affiliate plugged into the app. So when I hit play on the live feed, that's the version that comes up.
That's pretty awesome. Now, when you look at humanity like 500 years from now, which is sort of like the same distance as from now back to when Christopher Columbus first came to North America, and we
Mm-hmm.
could kind of see all the development that's happened there. Whenever you look out 500 years, I mean, do you see humanity still stuck on the Earth and just making these little side trips places, or do you see fundamentally humanity branching out into the rest of the solar system?
I see the branching out. Uh, the moon, Mars, maybe some terraforming on Mars, uh, maybe some moons around some of the other planets. You know what I think seems to be kind of a realistic portrayal of what it's going to be like is The Expanse. I didn't read the books, but I watched all 4 seasons, you know, and I found it really interesting because it's sort of taking the geopolitical problems of the Earth and just expanding it into the solar system. So all of our problems, you know, humanity hasn't. It's suggesting that humanity hasn't evolved socially in 500 years, just technologically, you know? So it's depressing in a way because all the political backstabbing is still the same and exploitation of people, you know?
And it might even be worse. You know, today there's a limits to the way you can exploit people, but you know, being able to say you get no air is kind of like raises that to a whole new level.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that think that humans shouldn't expand beyond the Earth, you know, or that, you know, the end of the world's coming and that's like a natural, expected, something to look forward to type of thing. And I was wondering if you know such people and kind of how do you communicate them with them about the opportunity?
I don't. I remember a speech by Helen Caldicott, and she was talking about how there were people at the time it was the uh, Bush 43 administration, I think it was, looking forward to nuclear Armageddon because that's what's going to bring the rapture, you know. That'll be the sort of mechanism. Uh, And I know some evangelicals, but I guess we haven't talked about that. I don't, even them, I don't think they think that we shouldn't explore the solar system.
Yeah, I mean, there's some that are really open to it, and there's some that think it's a distraction for sure.
Well, the distraction talk, I think, always comes from, why are we spending the money on that when we've got so many other problems that we're not spending money on? You know, it's sort of a scarcity issue. And I look at that as a political decision. You know, the government's got plenty of money. When the government decides that it wants to run a deficit and put things on the credit card, it's just going to go ahead and do it. So it's just a matter of what they want to spend money on. That's my attitude.
Yeah,
and I think they should spend money on this as well as everything else that humanity needs.
absolutely. I guess the challenge is really a group decision. You know, I mean, they're going to spend money on what they think will be most likely get them reelected, or
Yeah.
in ways that avoids issues that keeps them from getting reelected. And a lot
Yeah.
of that comes back to public perception. You know, so it's almost like we need some way to make the 300 million plus people in the US see value in this enterprise and connect it to their world somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really unclear on how that happens, I guess.
Yeah. Hopefully a sort of a global pride in humanity going back to the moon and then really gearing up to go to Mars would be something, you know, like when there's international campaigns that people all over the world can get behind, you know, charitable campaigns. I mean, I guess that only affect people that like to give, you know, give charitably. But at least you'd hear about it, you know, like Live Aid, for example. You know, everybody's heard of that, but that's because it had so many celebrities in it, I suppose. Maybe we need some celebrity boosters. Maybe it'll be Tom Cruise to help us, since he's going to make a movie on the ISS.
And apparently his trip is scheduled for 2021. So it's like really becoming something.
Right.
And that sort of goes into my next point is, if it was safe and affordable, would you go to space?
Oh, sure.
How far would you go? Just like suborbital, orbital, go to the moon for a couple of weeks, go to Mars over a course of a couple of years? Like,
oh, well, I'd do a trip, you know, a couple of weeks. That's like a business trip. I'd go to the moon and come back. I mean, I'm just hoping that I see one or both of these missions happen in my lifetime. You know, I just want to watch that on television.
and how safe would it have to be? And you know, it's really hard to quantify safe, but one way to think about it is how many people have to go first before you feel comfortable? Is that like a couple of dozen, hundreds, thousands, you know, hundreds of thousands?
Well, you know, after they have proof of concept the first time, then the way I look at it is, well, then they can do it again. You know, I mean, we already know how to put people on the moon and bring them back to Earth safely. It's just that it's been so long and the technology has changed and will have changed so much that they have to do it again to prove they can do it. So, you know, the second time, I guess. I mean, by the time me as a what's the word, you know, as a traveler, you know, as a vacationer would go to the moon, that the efficacy of it will have already been sorted out dozens of times, because you'd figure by the time an average person can go to the moon for a couple weeks and come back, there'd already be private companies running hotels on the moon, that kind of thing. You know, since we're speaking hypothetically. So I think that would be great. I mean, a couple of weeks, you figure all of the ill effects that you get from weightlessness won't be that much of an issue. You know, bone loss and your eyesight being affected and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. So you would take a trip to the ISS on a SpaceX rocket at this point?
Oh yeah, I think that's perfectly safe. I mean, it's not practical. It's
Well,
I don't know. I mean, there's already a Japanese businessman, a billionaire, who's already going to go up to the ISS. I think it is either on a SpaceX rocket or he already pre-booked a flight with Virgin or something.
well, actually, I know who you're talking about. He's booked a flight with SpaceX to take a Starship around the moon, and he's bringing like a set of artists with him too.
Right.
Um, and I think they're currently planning on like 2023 if the Starship comes together in enough time.
Well, yeah. So I mean, since we've had the space race since the 60s, I think this it's still a dangerous business, of course. It wasn't that long ago that a SpaceX rocket blew up, you know, on the pad. And I think that was this one where all of these school kids had these experiments in it that they've been working on for 6 months, you know? I can't remember when this was, but
I think September 1st, 2016.
oh, you got the date.
Well,
I would just think about those kids who are all sitting there in their classroom watching the launch and then it blows up, you know, how horrible it must have been for them, you know? So of course these things still happen, but all of the space agencies know what they're doing, you know, and I don't think it's that. It's easier for me to say because I'm not taking the trips and I haven't done all that training and all that, but I don't really see I think the thing that I worry about as far as safety of all these trips are private corporations cutting corners. You know, I don't think NASA is going to do it except when it's a massive mistake. You know, a huge comedy of errors, like with you know, O-rings with the space shuttle program. You know, they weren't trying to save money or something like that, I think, when that happened. You know, if I've got my history correct.
right. The Challenger accident in 1986, they launched on the coldest day ever. And well, the coldest day that they ever launched the space shuttle before. And the old rings were brittle and they didn't completely seal the gap in those that side booster. And they actually have a Netflix documentary called Challenger: The Last Flight. It's 4 parts. It's pretty good.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
Yeah, it just
I
came
was
out
actually
in like the last month or so.
I was actually quite disappointed when it was the Obama administration, I think, that ended the space shuttle program. If I've got that right.
Well, after the Columbia accident in 2003, there was a commission that was put together that decided that, you know, it's time to retire the space shuttle and, you know, by 2010. That got slipped to 2011. So it did
Oh, so
end during Obama, but it was already kind of planned back in the Bush time.
oh, I see. So he just took the recommendations of the commission.
Yeah.
That's totally different. See, that's good to know. We're talking about this.
Well, and it's really funny, whenever it ended, a lot of people in like the US House of Representatives and even the Senate had changed from the time the original recommendation came out. So whenever it got ended, I think there was a lot of people in the government who were really surprised because weren't part of that original decision, and you know, they didn't have the history.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I didn't catch that at the time.
Yeah, and also part of that kind of after the Columbia accident, George Bush Jr., George W. Bush, they put together this vision for space exploration, which according to it would have had a moon base on the moon in 2020. So
Yeah,
this might look a lot more real.
I remember that. I mean, it was, yeah, the Artemis mission, I think, is getting a completely different reaction now than his ideas were back then. I think back then, having these priority discussions that we're having, people are going, we're in the middle of a war, this is crazy. And I remember on the left, there were some people that were afraid that part of that whole push from the Bush administration was to militarize space. I remember comments from pundits talking about, well, he wants to put nuclear warheads on the moon and point them at the Earth, so the U.S. can control the entire planet, that kind of stuff. Well, the attitude towards the government was a little different back then.
Of course, it'd be interesting to see how long it would take for them to get from the moon to the Earth. You don't have quite the same restrictions and or requirements around something you plan, a warhead or a missile compared to like humans or what have you. So, but I mean, it took the astronauts 3 days to go from the moon to the Earth. So quite a lot of early warning potentially for your adversaries.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And that's kind of interesting about the Space Force. What do you think about that?
That was very political when that got announced. The Democrats were really annoyed that a new branch was being created, and that really necessary, and all of this. I remember all the political wrangling about it, but now it's there, and I don't know that people are arguing about it in the same way anymore, because it's established. And now it's just down to normal things like, where are they going to build their bases, and how are they going to cooperate with NASA, and how much money are they going to get, and that sort of thing. I don't know. I didn't form an opinion about whether it's really necessary to have another branch of the military, but eventually warfare is going to move in space. I suppose it's an inevitability as humanity reaches out. So it's important to be ready for that sort of thing, for defense.
Yeah, and just protecting of in orbit assets as well.
Right.
Your spy satellites, your weather satellites, your communication satellites, your GPS.
Right. Exactly. That's how a lot of it, I think, would play out. I mean, you think of these James Bond and Moonraker kind of scenarios where ships are flying around shooting lasers at each other, but satellites can get knocked out of the sky or knocked out by other satellites. It's just the technology has to get developed, and it'll start happening. And I mean, that could lead to war. I mean, just all out war. It'd be the same. I mean, I would figure it would be reacted to the same as one country shooting another country's military plane out of the sky.
Well, and one issue is, how do you prove what really happened?
Sure.
If a piece of space debris hits it, or a meteor, or it's like the result of a solar flare, that may be interpreted by that country who owns the satellite as being an act of war by whoever they have the highest tension with at that time.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you need some type of third-party observation program to come in there and say, yes, they really did attack you, or there was this thing you might be interested in knowing. Yeah.
We've been tracking the screw.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm actually really scared about space junk, because I've seen enough documentaries about it. I saw this quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson. It wasn't one of his thoughts on interstellar, tweet storms, but he said in an interview, oh yeah, gravity, that could totally happen.
Yeah.
That's pretty scary.
Yeah. We had an astrodynamicist from the University of Texas in Austin come and talk at our last North Houston Space Society meeting, Dr. Morabajah, and he's been putting together like a database that's like a collection of all the different sources of orbital debris and what have you. And in terms of that Kessler effect, I think is what they call it, where there's so much orbital debris that you won't be able to actually access space anymore because you would constantly run into something.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, orbital debris is like a big thing that he's concerned about. But in terms of completely closing off space to us, it may take, years or decades or even centuries, but eventually you'll see enough of that kind of organize into a manageable planes to allow for you to re-access space at some point.
I know there's different ideas on the table for trying to clean it up, going up with nets and things like that. Yeah, I hope there's an actual proactive attempt to gather some of that stuff up. I know it means a lot of legislation, like who's responsible for a piece of junk falling off of a satellite or whatever,
And according to international law, the Outer Space Treaty is whichever country launched the thing to begin with.
Oh, that's what's current.
Mm-hmm. And now proving who launched it and tracking that debris is a whole different story. But
yeah. Oh yeah, that's not my washer. That didn't come off of or whatever.
Exactly. Have you heard of Space Hero?
No.
It's a let's see, it's one of those reality TV shows that's in the works. That's going to be a global search to find somebody to send to the International Space Station for 10 days.
Oh yeah, I might have seen something about that in Politico Space. Yeah, so I've just heard of it, and that's all.
Yeah, it appears to be still in the formative stages, but that professor that I mentioned, he's a spokesperson for them, and I feel like he's reputable. And then Axiom Aerospace is like the company that's has agreed to get to do the training and manage the logistics of actually getting them to orbit it back, and they're a real company. So I feel like if they could get enough interest, they could get the sponsors, and it could really happen. And you talk about, you talk to people about, hey, we're thinking about sending some astronauts to space, and they're like, well, what are they going to do? What's the point? That's a completely different discussion than we're thinking about sending you to space. You're like, okay, I'm ready. All those reasons why or why not kind of go away.
Yeah. Yeah, you could see the advertisements in the papers, looking for people to audition for the reality TV show. Audition to be on the show to go into space, will train. All expenses paid, etc.
Yeah,
so they don't have to come up with 55 mil,
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking the budget for the whole thing, soup to nuts, has to be 100 million or more. By the time you do all the production and what have you. But you look at some of these TV shows. They have hundreds of millions of dollars of budget.
Oh, sure.
So
yeah.
It could be, and there's all sorts of great things you could do in terms of challenges, and you have all these like participants out there like blowing up their Facebook and Twitter and telling all their friends and creating like little videos and all the little interest and outreach and what have you. It could be sort of like the beauty pageants where you have kind of like local contests and they reach out to their community and it kind of builds up.
Yeah. You know what this reminds me of now that you mention it? You remember that movie Another Earth?
No, I have to see it.
It's a little absurd. It's an indie film Though a parallel Earth flew into our solar system. And that's the backstory. And it's about this woman who has a lot of personal problems, and she enters this contest to get put on a rocket and get shot to the other Earth. And she won the contest by writing an essay. So that was the mechanism. And it was kind of low budget. They never actually went to the other Earth or anything. It was all just kind of conceptual instead of a lot of sci-fi imagery and CGI. There wasn't any of that. So it was interesting, you know. That was sort of the backstory to her working out her personal problems and the relationship she had with this other person, you know.
Yeah. There's another movie. I mean, it is a Chinese film. It's called Wandering Earth.
I saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the people that envisioned that, you know, that you talk about kind of, I mean, the idea of actually moving the Earth with everybody on it. I mean, that's just.
They must have got that idea from Space 1999.
Oh, really? I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, that was a 70s, you know, science fiction TV show. And it had, who was the star? Martin, you know, he was in Mission Impossible. I can't remember. Anyway, so the whole thing was somehow the moon got knocked out of its orbit. And it's just flying through space. But there's a moon base on the moon. So every week, you know, everybody that's still working on the moon base on the moon runs into trouble because the moon is flying through space. You know.
That's interesting. It's going to be exciting times. You know, I personally believe. Do you remember the first time you got on the internet?
Huh. I remember my parents bought an IBM PC Junior, and it was the whole thing where we got a telephone jack splitter. You know, you plug it into the telephone jack, and it had two outputs, so you had to unplug the phone and plug the computer in, and so there was the whole dial-up situation. I remember getting a job at Power Tools. So it was this little company that sold a plugin for AOL.com, you know, and it was a browser add-on. And anyway, he had to explain to me how email worked before I got the job, because I hadn't done it yet. Yeah, those are strange. You know, I really consider myself lucky that I'm of a generation that grew up before the internet, you know, because I can just sit around, you know. I'm just like everybody else. I look at my phone all the time and all that, but I can just sit around and not do anything and not be miserable, you know, just be alone with my thoughts. You know, it reminds me of that study that somebody did that said men would rather get an electric shock than just sit in a room by themselves for 20 minutes. You know that one?
I hadn't heard that, but
yeah.
I don't know. Sitting in a room by myself for 20 minutes, that sounds desirable.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
in 1990, I mean, sort of like, where were you in terms of your life?
1990. Was I still going to community college? I hadn't started community college yet. I hadn't started my first band yet. So what was I doing with myself? I guess I was just wasting time with friends and working low-wage jobs, something like that.
Did you have a computer at that point?
Oh, when did we get our first computer? My dad took the lead on all that. He took night classes and taught himself basic and, well, he took classes to learn basic and C++, I think that was the name of the programming language. So we would, we got a couple of manuals and we would write little programs on our floppy disks, the 5.5-inch floppy disks.
Yeah, I remember those well. I always, my life changed so much when we got a computer that I actually got the second one for a computer, so I wouldn't have to keep swapping floppies.
Oh, see, so we didn't upgrade. We had this horrible dot matrix printer. We had the OneDrive. We never we didn't stick with it long enough for the little 3.5-inch, more hard plastic discs that come out. So I for some reason we moved on and didn't keep with home computing. I'm not sure why. I don't remember. When did we get that? Now I'm going to have to ask about that. That's a good question.
But can you imagine in 1990 talking to people about what we do every day in like 2000?
Yeah.
In 1990, nobody had a website.
Yeah.
Almost nobody had email, and there wasn't really, like, maybe at the local BBS they were exchanging messages. At that point, just calling the next city, you needed to have a long distance company, and they would charge you per minute.
Yeah, I'm really I love watching. These movies aren't even that old. You could have a movie from the 80s, where someone's trying to get a hold of somebody else, and the only thing they can do is just keep calling them. That concept is just so foreign today. A good example of that. It's set in a lot earlier time, but the principle is still the same. Like in The Godfather, where they had Al Pacino's character. He was just trying to help, so his brother just had him keep working the phone. Just keep calling this guy until you get a hold of him.
Right.
God, in the house. Yeah, it's crazy. It's totally crazy.
People would have no clue what you were talking about in 1990.
Oh yeah.
It'd be like completely unimaginable. CD stores were a thing, right?
Yeah.
Can you imagine? You couldn't even. You couldn't take somebody from 2000 and explain to them what 1990 was like. It's like, or even.
Oh yeah. And speaking of music, how could you imagine explaining to someone, oh yeah, well, eventually no one's going to be interested in CDs either, because you're going to be able to just download music. I guess I should say you're going to be able to steal it by to take their view, by just downloading it. People are just going to be able to share music without buying cassettes and taping them.
Are signing up for one of these services like Amazon Music Unlimited or what have you, where $9 a month you get everything you want. A CD used to be more than $9 for like 5 songs.
Yeah.
The reason I bring that up is I feel like that space over the next decade is about to go through the same transition that like computers and information, communications technology did in the 1990s. That over the next 10 years, what we conceive as being like normal is going to completely change in a radical way. And I was wondering, based upon your observations of how things are progressing, with like Blue Origin and SpaceX and, Rocket Lab and Astrobotic and Intuitive Machines and ULA and all these companies and all this kind of investment and technology being developed, if you felt the same way, or maybe you think that's a little bit an unfair comparison.
I don't think it's unfair. I've had this idea for a while, and it's hard to articulate, that people's lives, you'd think that people's lives would have, if you look at people from 1900, say, that were futurists, you know, people would assume that everyone would have a life of leisure in the future, and that robots would be doing all of our work for us. And in some ways, things have been very much the same. Everybody, well, it's kind of hard to I guess it's kind of hard to be that absolutist, because I mean, if you talk to someone like Andrew Yang, you know, he talks about people's jobs being automated away and that they're never coming back. And of course, that's changing people's lives. I mean, there's restaurants, well, there's fast food places you can go in and nobody's taking your order anymore, you know? Well, I mean, you could always do that at Wawa, I guess. But now other places are starting to do it too, like Panera Bread and what's the other one?
McDonald's.
Oh, McDonald's is doing it now too?
Yep. There's some McDonald's you go into.
Oh, okay. And Shake Shack and things like that. So in some ways, you could bring someone from 100 years ago into now, and they'd be surprised about things like, oh, everybody's got indoor plumbing, and everybody's, and the workplace is a lot different. And there's all of these industries that they never would have thought of before, like the airline industry and things like that. But in terms of really basic things, like everyone still getting sick and having to get up and go to work and things like that, there are some really basic things that haven't changed in a really long time. I don't know. It's kind of hard. Maybe I don't have this idea, you know, baked enough in my head to kind of explain. I don't know. I feel like.
Well, it's like washers and dryers. You know, since the time that we actually had a washer and dryer come, you have all these like little bitty bells and whistles, but the fundamental action of the washer and dryer is the same. And millions of people all around the world are still at the end of a wash cycle, physically taking their clothes out of the washer and putting them in the dryer. And it doesn't look like that's going to change anytime soon. That we sort of accepted that's as advanced as we want to get in terms of washers and dryers, you know?
Yeah, well, a big change might come in another functionality that hasn't changed in a long time, and that's the internal combustion engine. You know, it's just this week, Gavin Newsom announced that you can't sell those anymore in 15 years in California, you know? So we'll see how that plays out.
I was watching Elon Musk Tesla Battery Day and just looking at, I mean, if you think about an electric motor versus a combustion engine, I mean, it's really amazing the different scale of complexity. You know, I mean, like to have those pistons and get the right fuel mix and you know, get the air and you have to have the oil and the cooling and all these belts, and it's like all these moving parts, and the fact that we've been able to make such a complex machine so cheap and reliable. I mean, the big thing in the 1980s was calling into work and saying my car can't start. Nobody does that anymore, even though we all still use combustion engines, right? Of course, nobody's calling in for a whole different reason this year, but that's, even last year, nobody was calling in saying they weren't going to work because their car couldn't start. But in the 1980s, that's a perfectly acceptable excuse, you know? I remember my stepfather doing that from time to time.
I don't know. I think we'll have to wait until, you know, Star Trek time for something really radical to have changed in people's lives. You know, this is getting into nerd, down in the weeds Star Trek stuff. But you know how they can just replicate anything?
Yeah.
Well, so, you know, if you've got a replicator in your house, if you need something, you just replicate it. So there's this episode of The Next Generation where this guy says to this other guy, well, why is anybody nostalgic about the past? He says, people got sick. They needed money. You know? So that's really radical to me, you know, that idea. But even then, they couldn't get away from the idea that you had to mine something. The thing that ran all the tech, if you're not a Star Trek nerd, I'll just making a, you might know this already if you're a Star Trek freak, but
I watched a lot of Star Trek, but that doesn't necessarily mean I know that much about it. I'd like to see if I do know it. Let's see.
Okay. So, you know, everything ran on dilithium crystals. And dilithium crystals was a finite resource, and they had to be mined on planets where they were abundant, or where you could get them, you know. So there would be resource conflicts about dilithium crystals. That was a plot point, you know, that they could use once in a while. You know, the Klingons and the United Federation of Planets both discovered at the same time that there's dilithium crystals on some other third-party planet, and then they start arguing about it, you know, that kind of thing. And getting back to talking about the electric vehicle, it's amazing that it doesn't use fossil fuels, but it still involves mining, because you have to dig up precious metals in order to make the batteries that these things run on. So that's another thing. We haven't gotten to the point where we can just recycle things in order to make things run, you know. You still have to dig a hole in order to use this technology, you know. So I guess, so maybe it's a mixed bag, and in one way things are really different for people compared to centuries past, but in other ways it's the same. You know, things haven't changed all that much. Maybe that's my bottom line.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, or did I get way off subject?
No, that works. But I was just thinking about like plastics in our lives. You know, so many of the things that are relatively simple, like the shower curtain loops are, you know, like little drawers and containers, and you know, cups, and you know, a whole bunch of really simple plastic things are in our lives, and we throw away so much plastic too.
Oh yeah.
And now,
don't get me started on plastic.
But what if at some point we create a replicator-like device that essentially allowed for you to do in-home plastic recycling? So you take the plastic objects that are broken or that you no longer need, you put them into a bin, they get you know, broken down and filtered into like feedstock that then you use. You just can basically create anything. You're now buying designs online, and you're paying for the energy to now take that plastic and turn it into something else. And whenever you get done with that, you don't throw that away. You just put it as feedstock into this machine. And
yeah, well, I think you're close to talking about 3D printing now. I'm curious about how much waste there is, because you know, you get the coils or the blocks or whatever it is. I guess it depends on the type of printer that you have, that you throw in there, and then it cuts things. I'm not sure how much you can gather up all of the loose shavings and the dust and then just throw it back in and use it again, you know, somehow. But if you had a 3D printer in your house that was economical, because I think those things are still really expensive, especially the bigger they are, and throw one in, you know, it's a modern convenience, like a refrigerator that everybody has in their house. That would be really something. It's funny. There's still talking about washers and dryers. You know, you can still go places like apartment complexes that were built in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, where the washer and dryer isn't in the unit necessarily, and maybe they can't be in the unit. You have to go into the communal, washroom and run your clothes there, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's the other thing is water recycling. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, there's really no reason why like the water in the washing machine or dishwasher couldn't be filtered and
yeah.
reused. And then you just have to kind of top it off occasionally and, kind of empty out a bin with all the stuff the filters collected. So you could really create like these short cycle things. And I'm kind of hoping to see sort of our development in terms of how to support people living off planet, really causing us to develop and rethink these systems that have very long cycles that expand out hundreds of miles, involve thousands of people and systems, to really compress it down to self-contained units that you can see the entire cycle.
Well, I think you're going to see that first out of necessity on the bases, on the moon. Let's say you have a moon base with, eventually there's a whole city on the moon and on Mars. They'll be forced to do all that recycling and living smart, and living with conservation in mind. And in the in on Earth, we've got this fast food culture in most of the societies on Earth that I guess started maybe in the 50s with plastics, where they just tell you don't have to wash that, just throw it out. Before that, in the let's say in the third, maybe especially in the 30s because of the Great Depression, people were really into DIY and upcycling. When they would buy something, they would think about, well, how can I reuse this in my home? And nobody thinks like that anymore because everything's disposable and convenient. I mean, on a moon base, you're not going to be able to just throw anything out. There's this great book on textiles that I bought, and one of the essayists in it said, "There's no such thing as away. When you throw something away, it just goes somewhere else."
Exactly. I mean, either landfilled or gets reused
Ocean.
or ocean. Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, Richard, I really appreciate your time. Is there anything that you want to talk about that we didn't get to?
Oh yeah, my little anecdote about the ESA mission. The Philae lander mission that was run by Dr. Matt Taylor. And so I'm really into metal. And in the metal press, he got on the radar because when they had that mission, him and all of his team went and got, lander tattoos, matching tattoos. And there was a picture of him, and he had a death metal T-shirt on, and he had, he had sleeves of tattoos. And like I say, the metal press picked it up. Hey, this guy that landed put a lander on a comet, he's in the death metal. So that was pretty funny.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, things like that are so important, back to our earlier discussion about kind of cross-pollinating between groups. Like,
yeah,
now there's some metal fans that are aware of the mission that wouldn't have been otherwise.
Right, exactly. And it got a little, the actual mission got a little boost because they didn't just say he was some scientist at the European Space Agency. They said what he did. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need more of that. Like DoubleTree, I believe, did something where they put an oven in the ISS and cooked some cookies.
I read about that. That was hilarious. Yeah.
And then there's like L'Oreal is having some type of cosmetic product that they're advertising on the ISS.
No kidding.
So they paid to send it up there, and they got a picture of it in like the cupola with the Earth below. Um, and so you're seeing a lot more kind of um, things that might appeal to different groups, or at least might engage different groups. Now, those are kind of controversial because some people would say, that's not the purpose of the thing, and we should do this other.
Yeah.
But
well, I totally see that. NASA scientists shouldn't be spending their time taking pictures for private corporations and all that. But I think it's really important for the culture of space science to get out there. I think like we were saying, I hope it gets to the point where when emissions are a lot more important to the average person, they take more of an interest in it. And that might just be more that it's bigger news, that that news agencies feel like they need to report on this a little more than they do. But like I said, when bigger things happen, I think it'll get proportionately bigger coverage.
yeah, that's a good point. Or things that actually happen. Us going to the moon is just kind of like a thought. And people are like, well, NASA's been planning all sorts of stuff that never happened. So why even get worked up to even being aware of it? But I think maybe a large percentage of the United States knows about the Crew Dragon flight that sent 2 astronauts to the International Space Station from Florida earlier this year, because it actually happened.
Right. There's that, and plus, I think that was an international story from the maybe more from the commercial spaceflight industry angle. That a private company did this. The way that I perceived it, just because of the news that you and I pay attention of, is that drumbeat from Vice President Pence, sending American astronauts on an American rocket from American soil. You kept hearing that over and over and over, and which is true.
Yeah, exactly. And talking about missions, next year, Astrobotic and Intuitive Machines are landing probes on the moon as part of NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program, where they just pay for the service of delivering their instruments to the moon, and they don't design the spacecraft, choose the launch provider, or anything. They had selected 15 companies, there's 14 now, that every year bid on like 2 work orders per year to send things to the moon. And next year are the first 2. And Astrobot, and these companies, all they have to do to get the money from NASA is deliver the NASA payload where they agreed to. But in terms of if there's other capacity on the lunar lander, they can use that for whatever they want. And Astrobotic is doing this thing with DHL, the package delivery thing, where they have a DHL Moonbox, and for a micro SD card size thing, it's like $460 to send it to the moon. So I went ahead and bought that, and I'm planning to take these videos and put them on a micro SD card and send them to the moon as part of the mission next summer. So this might be an artifact that future generations will find.
This right here?
This right here.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Is this the 2020 version of the, the Voyager record?
Yeah, exactly. Except I think the Voyager record had a lot more hope of being readable than a micro SD card with the radiation and the heat and the cold. But I also think that humans in the futures are going to have like this amazing technology that could reconstruct micro SD cards that's been subjected to such conditions. So that's my hope.
I guess since it's all, when it comes down to it, ones and zeros, maybe that'll have more of a chance. I mean, there's this famous producer in rock that talks about, I don't like to record digitally because in the future, if you don't have a machine that can read these files, you're screwed. But you still have this tape, this 1.5-inch reel of tape, and the music is on there. And I'm going, well, yeah, but if you don't have anything to play it, I don't know. I think the argument goes both ways.
Oh, exactly. I have no CD or DVD player, and I have some DVDs that I want to watch. What do I do? You know?
Yeah, I guess you have to look at to see if they're streaming for free, and if they're not, if you're willing to rent them or buy them, and if not that, then see if somebody put it on YouTube. I guess those are your options, right? I mean,
Or
before you turn to a torrent site, which
or go to eBay and buy a vintage DVD player.
uh, I mean, is that even considered vintage at this point? Is vintage more of a, a VCR?
I'm not really sure. I'll how about an old DVD player? How about that? At
Yeah,
least.
yeah. I don't have a VCR anymore. It broke, and then I gave away all of my tapes instead of getting a new one or trying to get it fixed. Um, but still got DVDs, still got cassette tapes. My tape player still works. Still got my LPs and the CDs. And the car, the last car we got, it doesn't have a player. You can't throw a CD or a tape in. It has a USB. There's a USB jack, and then there's an 1/8-inch jack. So you can plug in your phone or your iPod or whatever. So that's cool. That still works at least.
Yeah,
Oh, it's got Bluetooth too, but I mean, I'm glad that it still has a port so you can at least do something else. The advanced technology of iPods, aren't connectable.
exactly. It's frustrating sometimes.
Oh, one other thing I wanted to say when we were talking about culture, you know, like advertisers trying to get in on space. Um, I guess I wouldn't call it routine that we're sending up rockets all the time. I mean, I guess in industry and the government, it's routine because it just happens all the time and you don't even hear about half of it if you're not paying attention. Or even if you do consume the news, you might not even notice the headline going by about somebody launching a rocket. But I guess for in the future, for it to be really routine for the average person, I think it would have to be like, that movie Gattaca,
Hmm.
where you can just stroll onto a rocket. You don't have to put on any gear, and you go to Saturn, and it's not that big of a deal. And rockets are going up every week, and nobody's paying any attention unless you work at the company that's shooting the rocket. I guess someday we'll get to that point. But I guess maybe by then you'd be launching from orbit.
Yeah,
In the future.
I hope so. I think that point may finally be early, may maybe a lot more closer to us than it's been at any other point in time.
Yeah, because the Starship from SpaceX, one of the elements is it getting launched from orbit, right? Instead of going straight from Earth.
Yeah, so they'll launch the Starship from the Earth, but then they'll have some flights afterwards to top up the tanks
Mm-hmm.
to send it, on afterwards. So you'll have one Starship that'll launch with the rocket that you plan to send, and then you'll have like maybe 3 to 5 Starships that launch that are nothing more than like fuel tanks, fuel to
Yeah,
load it up. So
yeah,
that'd be good. Well, Richard, thank you so much for your time. And
right.
so next year, whenever uh, Astrobotic is launching their moon probe and it's landing, you can know that it's a little bit more personal than other space things.
And that's where you're going to put, well, at least selected interviews, or
Well, I'm
what
planning to get a
are you?
terabyte SD card and put all the interviews that I've done up until that point. I have to
Oh,
send
all
it.
of them. Okay.
I
Are
have
you
to.
going to post any of these, or
Yep, they're
or are you just holding on to them until you can throw them on the SD card?
I know they're all posted on countdowntothemoon.org. All
Oh, okay.
260 some odd ones that I've done. And
Great. Are
so
they all unedited and raw, or are you cleaning them up? And
they're all unedited and raw, unless like the person said, "Oh, could you edit out this part or whatever?" So there's like been like 2 or 3 occasions where I've done that.
Yeah.
I do have a guy that's been putting together like weekly summaries, like a 5-minute summary for 7 interviews. So he's been kind of going through and um, you know uh,
Oh, great. Like a
creating some
highlight reel.
highlight. Exactly.
Cool.
So
Is that are those posted on there too?
they're on the YouTube channel, but
Okay.
I should probably put them on the website somehow also. Sometimes it's kind of funny how he kind of edits it because as I remember like the interviews and it's a great key for me, but it also doesn't somehow make a coherent story. But
Sure.
yeah, but I
Oh,
think
yeah,
it
he has to watch them and find a few bits where he goes, "That's good copy. I'm going to use that bit."
exactly, exactly.
Well, it shouldn't be a big deal to still have the flow being the same. He puts them on YouTube or does, or at least if you do the posting, he cuts them for you. And then from YouTube, you can embed them back on your website.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I could put them there. I think I'll just add a page called weekly summaries and then just put the ones we have so far and people could
Yeah,
just kind of see them.
yeah.
So,
Sounds great.
oh,
Done.
great. Awesome. Well, you have a good rest of your day, and thank you so much again for participating. If you know anybody else that's willing to talk, especially non-space people, um,
Uh,
hopefully you could convince them to sign up. I'm looking forward to the day that I can, interact with a stranger at a coffee shop and not be weird.
yeah, I know. I know. I hear that. I hear that. Sure. I've got some people that I think would be willing to talk, you know, um, who would find it a lot of fun. I had a great time. Thanks for your patience, and I appreciate you doing this project too.
Yeah, thank you. I've learned so much, and it's always been great to kind of, exchanging ideas and exploring sort of this area together.
Yeah,
So,
for real.
okay, well, I'll talk to you later then.
Okay, bye.
Bye bye.